Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here from the college and from beyond. Probably there are quite a lot from the clinical school. So this is an exciting evening, I think, for both of us. It will be the last such conversation I do. This was an idea I dreamt up really when I first came here, because back then the number of women in the college was somewhat dismal. It is an awful lot better now. We are 50-50 on our undergraduates and got a much healthier number of female fellows. So that's all good. So perhaps this has served it, whatever purpose it had. But I am delighted that Sharon has agreed to be my last victim. It's kind of passing the baton on for whatever she chooses to do next. But of course, I'm still here as the master for several more months, actually. So, Sharon, hello, welcome.
Thank you. I'm slightly concerned by the use of the word victim, but so I'm not quite sure what's coming, but bring it on.
Bring it on, right, yes. Well, you've, I'm sure, coped with far worse than me. So let's start quite early on, because you haven't had the kind of standard trajectory of many academics. I think that would be true to say. I'm sure not all academics have privileged backgrounds, but you seem to have come from a family where it was unimaginable, if you like, that your parents did not envisage education going beyond about 16, as I understand it. So what were your early years like?
Yeah, when you say not many academics have got my trajectory, what I say is not many academics actually talk about it. I think there's more academics out there who actually do have my trajectory, but perhaps are anxious about talking about it, because I think there can be, people have preconceived ideas about what that means. But no, I was born into a loving family. I had a brother who's a few years older than me. But my parents, they were we didn't know anybody who'd gone to university. So my parents, they'd left school themselves at 13 or 14. My mum had become a seamstress and my dad was a carpenter. And I was brought up in a loving home, but academics were never talked about. And I never knew anybody who was interested in academia. So I went to school, and I would say I was a stunning failure, actually, if I might say so, because I failed my 11 plus. In those days, you would take the 11 plus, and you would either be streamed as a result of that to a grammar school, where you could do the equivalent of GCSEs and A-levels, or a secondary modern school, where you had to leave school at 16. So about 75% of children in my cohort overall went off to secondary modern school, and they were designed. It was a post-war kind of gearing to look at how to educate children, and the top rung would go to grammar schools, and they would do things like classics and so on. There was another group who would go to technical school and learn things like sciences and engineering, and then the secondary modern were really gearing you for manual and semi-skilled labour. So we learned, the boys learned metalwork and woodwork, and we learnt cooking and needlework. I actually got a certificate. I looked up the other day. I got a certificate for my needlecraft. So that's really come in handy. So
I might have taught you how to be a surgeon.
Yes, that's true. I missed that, didn't I? So the school, some people have referred to it as sink schools, slightly harsh. But what I felt really was that I had no interest in academia. I couldn't see the point of learning, no role models. And looking back, it was a massive waste of potential from across, my kind of cohort, actually, that we were being prepared for a world that would rapidly change. Mm-hmm. There was computers being developed as we left school. We didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about innovation. So we were, I think, generally unprepared for the future world. But just one thing before I stop, there was an announcement at Assembly to say, if you're interested in doing A-levels, we didn't really know what A-levels actually were. If you're interested in doing A-levels, then form a cube outside of the staff room at break time. And I happened to walk past, and there was nobody, because we didn't know why you would want to do that. Everybody wanted to leave school at 16 and get on with work.
Yes, and I think that was a very common kind of situation at that point. I mean, I'm a few years older than you, and this segregation into those who were going to go to grammar school and those who weren't. And it was pernicious. And I remember comprehensive schools being rolled out across most of the country. And that ought to have transformed it. But I still think there are, in our schools, kids who aren't encouraged so that they cannot develop their potential. And it's really worrying that, you know, if you haven't got that, I can't remember the phrase, something or other capital, at home, then your teachers have to provide it. And if they don't, how do you learn about anything beyond what your parents may or may not have done themselves?
And that's right. I mean, it either comes from your parents, or it comes from the school, or it comes from both, or it comes from a significant other who's going to influence you. And if you don't get that, then you don't know what's out there. You don't know what you can explore, which is so important. And so important for us to realise, you know, embedded within the university, that trying to encourage people who are in that kind of huge potential but not quite tapped so far, how do we actually get those people to think about coming to Cambridge, think about coming to Churchill? Because you only realise your full potential once you start to put that kind of journey into practice. So somebody said to me the other day, oh, you know, your 16-year-old self, they must have been gobsmacked that, you know, you would become a master. And I thought a lot about that. I thought, would I? I had no idea of my potential at 16. Yeah. Who does? Yes. It's like the journey that you go on to see your full potential. So that kind of analogy of what would you think at 16 if, well, you don't, because life is just like one step after another. That's how your life pans out.
Well, I suppose there are people out there, and I won't ask people to raise their hands. I'm sure there are people out there who at 16 think, not necessarily they want to be a master, but they want to become an academic scientist or a linguist or whatever. I'm sure there are people who know that. And I always say to our freshers that you may think you know what you're going to do, but life's not like that, and the chances are it won't turn out like that. And if you don't know what you're going to, or what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. I think the idea that if you have succeeded, you always knew what you wanted to do is complete rubbish. But I think that's something that has to be said over and over again.
I mean, there's a really important question. In any point in your life, is that your final destination? The answer is always no. So there's something else, another door to walk through, another opportunity. And, you know, there is no final destination until our final destination, if you like. So, you know, let's stop thinking that we are going to be X when we grow up. Plus the fact that it assumes that you are going to grow up at all, so which isn't always the case. But
I know a lot of adults who say, I'm still working out what I want to be when I grow up. Yes. And I think that's perfectly healthy.
I think it's brilliant. Yeah. I think it's brilliant, actually.
Yes.
It's a philosophy for life, actually.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I think that's right. So anyhow, you did leave school at 16. You became a dental assistant. I don't know.
Yeah, I did.
Was that an aspiration at the time that you wanted?
It was a complete accident. So I was working in a corner shop, which I'd worked at during my school days. So, you know, evenings and weekends I'd go and work at this corner shop. It's called a VG store, so it sort of sold a bit of everything. And there was a notice board there that had a job kind of notice. And there was this dentist like a few doors down that was advertising for a dental nurse. So I applied and I got it. So I was 17 when I started that. That was a revelation because this dentist, his single-handed practice, I was the only person he employed. It was quite interesting. So I did the reception, I took the phone, I assisted him at the bedside, and I was like, I opened up the practice, I closed the practice, I worked 6 days a week. And actually, I realised the value of work, actually, for me. For me, the value of work was immensely important. And this dentist appeared to think I was capable. You know, he actually trusted me to do all of this. So it was a realisation from the point where I was a bit of a no-hoper at school. I nearly brought my school report along, but even that was too embarrassing, to tell you the truth. And that has to go into the archives, probably, locked up for 50 years. So he made me feel I was a capable and competent person. But it also led me down the path of healthcare. I really liked working with people. And, you know, who likes to go to the dentist, right? And Well, some people might, but I find it quite scary to go to the dentist, and working with people who are coming for their dental appointment and helping them through that, I thought was utterly brilliant, actually. And I could do all that, and I was 17, so I was on a bit of a high at that job.
But did that make you think you could do more?
I could do it differently. I wanted to actually expand it into nursing, so I thought that I wanted to deal with more than this part. I wanted holistic people and have deeper conversations with them. So I trained. I actually nearly didn't get into nursing because I didn't have enough qualifications, but they did let me become to train as a nurse, and I trained in Brighton at the Royal Sussex County Hospital as a nurse, and that was also a dream job. So I really loved specialising in the medical wards where people had strokes, heart attacks, that sort of thing, infections, respiratory infections. And so I completed my training, and then I specialised in end-of-life care. So I worked in hospices and so on. That was incredibly rewarding, but sort of slightly inconveniently, perhaps, in retrospect, 6 months into my nursing job, it was probably the only eureka moment I've ever had in my life. I thought, oh, what those doctors do is really interesting. I want to do that. And it was just like this moment where I said, right, I just love the process of talking with a patient, examining a patient, doing some tests, working out what's wrong with them, and then suggesting some treatment, and the interaction you would get from being with patients. And so 6 months into my nursing training, I wanted to be a doctor, but actually I didn't have the GCSEs or A-levels to do that, so I completed my nursing training. But I don't regret doing that. I did like the work very much.
What was that, 2 years, 3 years?
It was a 3-year training, and then I then went on to do part-time A-levels at a technical college whilst I worked in a hospice. So it's like a 5-year period, actually.
That must have been quite hard work.
I
don't mean the hospice per se. I meant doing the A-levels. You don't remember?
I don't find it hard work. I don't think anything is hard work. If you like it, that's the thing. I've never done a day's work in my life. So I don't find. So that's why I sort of slightly stumbled on the question: is it hard work? No, actually, because I actually was curious enough to, get the books out, the biology A-level books, when I was, on a night shift or whatever. I'd converted to doing a lot of nights by that point, because that gave me a bit more time to study. So no, it wasn't hard work, actually.
Okay. So how long did that stage take? You did 3 years training as a nurse. Yeah. Then you had a job and you were studying for A-levels.
I had to do GCSEs first because I didn't have those either.
Right.
So I went to Brighton Technical College, where I did chemistry, maths and physics at what they called O-level then, part-time. And then I went off to Lewis Technical College to do A-levels part-time. And I did biology and physics in the first year. And actually, slightly embarrassed to say this, but I got an E on physics the first time round. So I hope there are no physicists. Oh, Athena, you're a physicist. I'm so sorry. I'm even more embarrassed now that I got an E for my physics, but there you go. It improved to a C the next year. I refused
to do biology O-level, so it's all right.
Well, okay. So I got a C the next year, right? And so then I did chemistry and physics the year. The chemistry was really fascinating because we did this part-time over a year, and the teacher was up front with us and said, in chemistry, we're only going to have time to teach you 2/3 of the syllabus. So we're going to teach you physical chemistry and organic chemistry, and you're going to have to wing the inorganic chemistry. We haven't got time to teach you. So, that was extraordinary. And that was, so I just sort of brushed up on the books as best that I could. And so, I got the A-levels, and I ended up with 2 Bs and a C, and naturally I failed to get into university twice in 2 years.
You say naturally?
Well,
I mean, then the admission standards, the grades were higher, the admission standards
well,
looked
perhaps
low.
it's a reflection on how I felt about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really determined to try it, and I didn't. And
did they still have medical caps for women?
No.
Okay.
No. So I tried. I went through kind of UCAS, then I went through clearing, and because I was a mature student by then, actually the number of places where you could go as a mature student was quite limited. So my 2 top spots were St Mary's in London and Southampton. And Southampton was my absolute top spot because they had 20 students a year every year that were considered to be mature, I wanted to go there, but I didn't make the grade actually. Except, yeah, it's actually my husband's inspiration. He's watching online, I think. He says, look, why don't you just ring them up? And that sounds like a bit of a crazy idea. Just pick up the phone and say you want to talk to somebody there. So I rang up and I said, I want to talk to the admissions tutor for medicine, please. And they made an appointment for me to see this guy called David Wilton, who is an emeritus professor of biochemistry. And he saw me, and he asked me to write an essay as to why I wanted to do medicine. Unfortunately, I haven't kept it. It would have been quite amusing, I think, now. But he interviewed me, and almost on the spot, he said, you've got a place. And in fact, I think somebody must have dropped out that year, because within a month, I was at medical school. It was like amazing. And, you know, that's another point, really. David took a chance on me. He had no idea, I don't think, that I would fly. You know, probably thought I would crash and burn. But when we're seeing students who don't actually come up to the kind of normal expectation, we have to look for where their, you know, where their potential is, and that's very difficult. I think it's a very difficult one. But he gave me that chance, and you know, I'm still in touch with him. Actually, I'm eternally grateful to him.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of luck, but I'm sure one of the things he saw in you, and I don't think it would work these days. I don't think an admissions tutor wants people to be ringing. Students to be ringing out, but you know, doing that.
Yeah, I wonder what would happen now if I rang up.
I think you would just not be
are?
put through.
Yes.
Yeah. But things were different then. The numbers were very different. But the determination, you know, I am not going to be put off. That is really an important life skill, if you like. Just saying, no, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to find a way to do it. And that must have been part of why he was prepared to give you a chance. And, you know, he may have thought, well, if she crashes and burns, it's no skin off my nose.
When you've had a eureka moment, it's very disappointing when it doesn't work out. That's all I can say. And, you know, I didn't want to row back. I didn't know where I'd row back to, actually. I could have rowed back to nursing, but by this time, I was really interested in science, you know. And I wanted to do that, and I wanted to apply that to patient care. So, yeah, if I'd had to imagine a different alternative outcome, I'm not quite sure what that would have looked like, but fortunately, I didn't have to.
But presumably at that point, you hadn't thought beyond the next stage. You were thinking, I want to train as a doctor, but you weren't thinking, I then want to do academic research or...
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. And throughout my life, I've just put one foot in front of another, to tell you the truth. I've never known. So when I'm somebody who actually likes lots of things. I really liked, in Southampton, we got to see patients very early on. In year one, we went to GPs, loved that. And then whenever we did a subject, we did intensive 2-year, sort of preclinical, liked all of that. And so I just sort of threw myself into it and just loved it all. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I just went into my house jobs. I sort of won 10 undergraduate prizes, and I got honours and distinction. I think David Wilton was probably quite pleased he let me in after all of that. But, you know, that was simply a sense of I was like a child in a sweetie shop. I just loved what I was doing, and I just couldn't learn enough at that point.
Well, that makes you a very satisfactory student,
very hungry.
Yeah, but that's the kind of person that people want to teach, because they will, you know, see you blossom, or whatever the correct phrase is. And then you went and practiced as a doctor?
Yes, I did. So I trained in medicine, and I got what's called MRCP, Member of the Royal College of Physicians. I did that. And so I was a sort of middle grade doctor before I then went into an academic track. And that was based on another failure. So
This is a failure.
Yes. So I was working in Brighton. I'd passed my MRCP fairly early on in my kind of trajectory. And I thought, actually, I was really inspired by a particular cardiologist there called Douglas Chamberlain, incredible man. And so I thought, right, well, I'm going to look for a cardiology job as a registrar. That's sort of like middle grade. And I thought, right, I'll go and see what... And I'd never heard at this stage, this is really something to admit, I'd never heard of Oxbridge. And at this stage, I really had, you know, when there's no internet, it doesn't come into your... And when I was applying for university, I'd never heard of Oxbridge. So this job came up in Oxford at the John Radcliffe Hospital for a cardiology position. I thought, great, that's something I want to go for. And I went to the interview, and it seemed to go well, but then they rang me up and said, well, we're not going to offer you the job. And it went to this fantastic internal candidate called Keith Channon. He was utterly amazing, actually. He was just so good, and I'm pleased he got it. But they then said, would you like to come and work here for a while and just like try a few things out and see what you fancy? So I said, I wanted to be a cardiologist, not so sure I want to just, dip my toe in the water in Oxford. And so, and then this guy called David Ledingham, who's he was one of the original authors of Oxford Textbook Medicine. He rang me again and he said, look, you're going to come to Oxford. And so I went to my consultant and I said, shall I? This isn't what I applied for. He said, I think it would be quite good if you did that. So I packed my bags and went to Oxford, and that was the start of my academic career. I did a range of things, but then I focused on microbiology and infectious diseases, and I got a Wellcome Trust 5-year fellowship to do a PhD. And I had huge support there, actually, to stay and to flourish. And in fact, I ended up being in Oxford for 12 years. But again, it was like a complete fluke.
I think we should be open about the fact that so much of life is luck and flukes and just being in the right place at the right time, or however you want to phrase it. But what about your dreams of cardiology?
Well, I still like cardiology. I still have my stethoscope, actually, and I take it out every now and again. But there is no going back, because cardiology has just moved on leaps and bounds. There's all sorts of interventional cardiology that I wouldn't be qualified to do. But I do think back to those early days when I was with Douglas, and what that says to me is that people can be inspiring. And that's why I wanted to do it, because I just thought he was brilliant with the patients, knew so much about the heart. And actually at the interview, they said to me, there were respiratory physicians and cardiologists, they said, why do you want to do cardiology? I said, well, it's the heart. It's at the very centre of the body. I have no idea why I said that. It sounds a bit silly. It's at the very centre of the body, and your heart is so important to you as a person. And the respiratory physicians sort of sat up at this point and said, well, the lungs are vital too. Perhaps that's why they remembered me, but it was. I do find cardiology fascinating, but hey, microbiology is also completely fascinating and completely revolutionised since I first got interested.
Well, I was going to say, you talk about cardiology having changed, but microbiology must be an utterly different thing.
Yeah, it is, with all of the information about the microbiome and how that affects us, and so it's like another organ. It's called another organ, and there's more bacteria in your gut than there are human cells in the body, etc. At least that's the estimate. Whether that's true or not is another matter. But the microbiology has been transformed, and of course transformed through the pandemic too. People's understanding of the role of pathogens. So some distant outbreak of Ebola or whatever, doesn't happen where you're living, but all of a sudden there's this pandemic that's ripping through the world, and all of a sudden, the study of pathogens becomes very, very personal.
Yes, indeed. Well, before we get to what you did during the pandemic, you then went to Thailand.
Yes. So I did my PhD, and I did a year of that in Trinity College Dublin and the rest in Oxford, and then I went to Thailand. So I worked for a Wellcome-funded unit there in Bangkok, and we were based in Bangkok for utilitarian reasons. We could actually get supplies there and so on, but actually our main work was in rural Thailand and in Cambodia and in Laos. So I ran bacterial diseases research across that patch, and we were particularly interested in, for example, doing clinical trials to look at the impact of medicines for fever to try and improve outcomes for patients. I studied quite a few diseases of the rural poor, things that were associated with bites and inoculations, bacteria getting in. That was, and leptospirosis, those sorts of quite esoteric conditions, but very common in people who are wading through mud all day. Mm-hmm. So that was incredible, actually. We were there for 7 years. I was there for 7 years.
Was there any difficulty in being a woman in that environment?
not at all. It was, I would say...
Less than in Oxford, perhaps.
I couldn't possibly comment. But being a woman wasn't a problem. I would say that there were a few things that I learned so much. The first thing was, when your face is pressed up against the window pane of the UK and the politics here and the kind of the environment and so on, you can get kind of quite worked up, and I'm sure there's people in the audience who feel quite worked up about the current politics. Actually, when you take yourself away to a different country, not only do you see everything in a different perspective, but you see the global picture, and I hadn't really ever done that before. And so seeing that, I believe I became a much more of a global citizen. And the other thing is that my Thai colleagues taught me about different cultures and how people lived very differently, had very different sets of values. And this is a very small example, but one of the things I really learnt from them, which I think is very well recapitulated in Churchill, is it's really important to eat together and you converse together. And when you're at work, the idea of sitting at your desk with a sandwich, absolutely horrifying to my colleagues. So we would always take some time out and go and actually get some street food and then sit down and eat it together. And so the fellowship in Churchill and the ability to have lunch and dinner and converse, that's kind of recapitulated here, but very important for human interaction.
I mean, of course, it was sort of a key part of the medieval college, not that they were medieval, but I mean, that spirit of you are a community.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And yes, departments in Cambridge, a lot of sandwich eating, I would say.
Couldn't possibly comment on that either.
You're being very discreet. So Thailand, 7 years is quite a long time to be living in a very different culture. Where were your children at that point?
Well, they went to school there. So the day that we left for Thailand from England, we were living in Oxford, and it was just before Christmas, and we were standing in our lobby. I had a 6-month-old baby and 2 6-year-old children, and my husband. And we had 12 suitcases because we had to take enough nappies and baby powder to last us, because our stuff, I don't know if you've ever moved abroad, but everything goes on a container and it takes weeks or months to get to you.
Yes.
So where we were with 12 suitcases, and I looked at my husband and said, wow. But we loved it. And yeah, sometimes looking back 7 years feels like a long time, but actually looking forward, then it went by in a flash. So my kids went to international school, and we migrated back, them first, then me, when I felt that I wanted to put them into secondary education in the UK.
Did they speak Thai? Did you speak Thai?
A little, but I didn't speak enough to be able to be board certified for my medicine, so I couldn't practice medicine out there. So I would go on the ward rounds, but my Thai colleagues would be
Right.
Thai certified and do the medicine.
No, I was thinking you might have needed to do quite a lot of interviewing about what interventions were happening and things.
My Thai colleagues were, they were excellent in English speaking. The English language was excellent. So I do, looking back, I wish I'd learnt more Thai. But there's only so many hours in the day. I had 3 small children. I was travelling all around the region. I was running, a part of my section which had, 200 people or so. And I had to focus on the work rather than, to learn Thai would have been wonderful. But at the time, in all honesty, it felt a bit indulgent when actually what I needed to do was go and do the work. And I had every mechanism to go and do the work without speaking fluent Thai. And Thai is not an easy language to pick up. So that was the decision I made, right or wrong, and so I don't speak much Thai.
Well, it probably isn't very useful in Churchill. It might be one or two people, but yeah. So you came back to Oxford, or did you come back to Cambridge?
I came back to Cambridge. So it was interesting because when I reached the point where I wanted, Pete, my husband, and I agreed that we'd come back, I looked for jobs, and there were several jobs that were really interesting to me actually, but Patrick Sissons was alive then, who was the Regis Professor of Physics then, and he got in touch and just said, well, there may be a job coming up, and of course I had to go through all of the process of applying and so on. But that was when I came to Cambridge for the first time. I made the transition from Thailand to Cambridge, more or less.
I'm from Oxford to Cambridge too.
Yes, yes.
Would you like to
Is
comment?
That important, Athene?
Sorry?
No, is that important?
I don't know.
I mean, what I would say is that I'm very conflicted during the boat race because we lived in Oxford for 12 years. I've lived in Cambridge for 14. So you can just see where this is going. You know, the balance is tipping, isn't it, towards... And I actually go in person. I mean, my eldest daughter was a rower at school. Absolutely love the atmosphere. So, the boat race is immensely exciting. And I followed actively some of the rowers from Churchill who obviously did,
this year
incredibly well. So
yes.
I think my persuasion is towards Cambridge. But my daughter is now in Oxford, so we've got a bit of a mixed family in terms of how we cheer.
You talk about the importance of diversity, so that's fine.
Yes.
So did you come back as a microbiologist?
Yes, I was a clinical microbiologist. So before I left to Thailand, I was a consultant microbiologist, and in hospitals, they oversee the laboratory tests. They go on to wards and do what's called consults. And so somebody would say, someone's got a fever, we don't know, can you come and advise what could be wrong with this patient? And so it's like a specialist service. Mm-hmm. So I was a consultant microbiologist at the John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford. Then I went to Thailand, then I came back. So I'm still clinically qualified and I'm on the GMC register. But when I came back, I thought, what am I going to do? And Cambridge is a fantastic place for genomics. And so there wasn't anybody trying to apply pathogen sequencing into a hospital setting at that time for patient benefit. And so I was linked up with the Sanger and I was in the Department of Medicine. And that's where my story around pathogen genomics really took off actually in a big way.
So you created that?
I guess I was saying, where's the technology going?
Right.
What can I do? I couldn't bring my tropical diseases research with me. What can I do, which I feel is at the cutting edge? So sequencing was happening, of course. It was happening in research laboratories. It wasn't happening in the clinical setting. It wasn't happening in clinical labs. And I thought, actually, that's a really good technology. It distinguishes between, two examples of the same sort of bacterial species very closely because you sequence every base of their genome. And if they are vastly different, then they're not part of an outbreak spreading between people. If they're very closely related, highly likely to be part of a transmission chain. So I kind of got into that when I came back. I would say that Julian Parkhill, who was at the Sanger, Gordon Dugan, were instrumental in opening the door at the Sanger for me as well. I mean, it's these people, isn't it? It's these examples of people opening the door for you. And they helped me establish a research career in genomics back here.
I mean, you said that it wasn't at that point being used in a clinical setting with patients. Obviously, during the pandemic, that all changed. But is that something that is continuing? Is it now routine in hospitals?
I wish I could say it was.
Yeah.
It is in some hospitals. It's very patchy.
Right. Is that because of access to equipment?
Oh, the answer is very long, but it's a multitude of reasons. And one of the biggest barriers actually is lack of access to automated interpretation tools. So genomes are quite complicated. If you had a black box system where you fed the genome data in and it gave you an answer like patient A and patient B have very highly related bugs, you've got an outbreak, or they're completely unrelated, don't worry about it. That's what people want to know. They don't want to know the basis of the genome. That's what is missing, and therefore you need a lot of expertise to interpret the genomes.
Right.
So it's not really rolled out yet, but I'm hopeful. What I think is in my lifetime, I'd be very disappointed if we don't have a black box solution to sequencing microbes for patient care and infection prevention and control.
I mean, you might have thought the pandemic would have changed that, improved that.
I think it's helped. I think it's helped us give a nudge and show to people that sequencing is actually worthwhile of pathogens.
Well, I mean, you led the COVID genomics project.
Yes. So COG UK, or COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium. So what happened there was I was working alongside Patrick Vallance, our Government Chief Science Advisor, and Chris Whitty, our CMO. And they knew I was a sequencer. And sort of February 2020, we got into a conflict. So actually there'd been almost no cases, 1 or 2 cases of the virus in this country. We got together and said, right, we've got to set up a sequencing capability in the country. And actually, in retrospect, that's quite forward thinking. So I kind of picked up the phone to 5 of my genomics expert colleagues and said, does this sound right to you? Do we really need to sequence the virus to find out how it's going to change over time? Yep. So the next week I got 20 experts together in a room and said, how on earth do we do this? It was completely novel to roll out sequencing across the country. So we got together. It's the last face-to-face meeting we had actually before everything just shut down. How are we going to do this? Who's going to do this? On the back of that, we wrote a proposal over a weekend which outlined 21 sequencing facilities. So that included 16 universities, 4 public health agencies, the Wellcome Sanger Institute, and that was networked to 100 NHS testing labs, and the Lighthouse Labs, ultimately the Lighthouse Labs where they did testing for community samples. And I went to Patrick and Chris and said, okay, we have a plan, and they gave me £16.5 million, and the Sanger gave a total of that to 20 through in-kind contribution. And there we were, we had the money, but no people. So that was quite interesting. And then, so we said, right, okay, we've got the ideas, we need to get this going. And it was actually run from Cambridge. The Department of Medicine was fantastic, the lawyers and so on, setting up the legal contracts, the finances. We needed to set up data sharing, ethics, everything had to be set up. But we set up the framework for sequencing across the country really fast. And that's why we were global leaders, actually. We didn't hang around, we didn't wait thinking we've got to prove that it's worthwhile before we do this. We simply did it.
So when you say quite fast, we're talking a month?
Well, by the time we put the application into Patrick, we were already sequencing. People up and down the country were sequencing the virus, actually using their own expense account, as their own finances. So we'd already, by the time we got the money, we'd sequenced hundreds of genomes.
And you must have found what happened as that played out and explored the different mutations. Must have been fantastically rewarding.
Well,
dismal as well, I'm sure,
actually. It was pretty dismal. I mean, the virus didn't need any help in terms of needing to mutate to start with. It had a kind of an R0, which is how quickly it transmits, of 2.8. So if I get it, 2.5 people in the audience get it, and then that person 2.5. So it was already spreadable. It had other tricks up its sleeve. So unlike other viruses, you spread it before you get symptoms. Mm-hmm. You could have no symptoms at all, and you could spread it. So all these things actually caught us unawares. Yeah. But the RNA virus can mutate, and it also had a trick up its sleeve because it mutates around in the genome about twice a month. But in people who are infected, who are persistently infected and can't clear the virus, it's like a kind of evolutionary gym. The virus sort of bounces around, mutates, and if there's mutations that are adapted to live in humans, like avoid the immune system, then they would stick, they would stay. So alpha variant, when it came out, was very different from anything else we'd seen because it likely came from somebody who'd been chronically infected, couldn't clear it. And that's what we weren't really expecting. I think if there's any surprise, it was that. But by then, we'd be sequencing for about 8-9 months or so, and we were ready. So, the initial variants, cacophony of different variants, and all competing against each other, but nothing was strong enough to outcompete the other in this sort of fitness race. It's all very Darwinian. It's like Darwin's laws of natural selection. Then Alpha came along, and it swept the board.
It just took over, yes. I mean, I have to say I saw the pandemic from a very different position. It was all, how do you get the students to agree to doing the testing? That was so important. And that, yes, you may not have any symptoms, but you've got to, what was word, self-isolate and all the rest of it. Yeah. It was not the happiest time in my mastership. No. You were probably having a much better time of it than I was.
I wouldn't say better, I have to say. Very long hours, but... yeah, and to tell you the truth, I don't think anybody had a good pandemic, and it's a question of how it affected you, how it impacted on you. I was fortunate that nobody in my immediate family died as a result of COVID, but we were working in the hospital where many people were looking after people with COVID. Actually, I was on the board of the hospital at this point as a non-exec director. It was an incredibly difficult time for the hospital. What I would say is, instead of a good pandemic, some people had the privilege to be able to contribute to the response. Yeah. And the reason that consortium ended up with 600 people, volunteers, is because people felt, well, I don't want to sit at home, actually I want to go and do something. Yeah. And it gave them that opportunity. So for me, the magic was actually in 600 people coming together to say, we're going to sequence. And people would often say, it's a privilege to sequence these genomes, because you can work out if, once you've categorised, is it more transmissible than the last bunch? Is it immune-evasive, gets around vaccines? Does it cause more severe disease? That's why that categorisation was so important, because it kind of was the foundation stone for doing those studies.
Now, I'm conscious time is moving on and we should let the audience have a chance to ask questions. So online or in the room, please be thinking about that. But perhaps we should touch on why leave all that and want to come to Churchill.
Yes. Well, I read the job description and I thought, it was another eureka moment. I thought, this place is the place for me. And I would say that there's several reasons for that. First of all, I believe through my interactions that this is a friendly, inclusive college where people actually care for each other. And I would hope that people would develop a sense of belonging here. I'm going to develop, I already have a sense of belonging actually, which is probably a bit cheeky, but I will develop a sense of belonging, and that's really important. So it's a wonderful community. That's what struck me about it. That's the first thing. So the place is important. The purpose for me was fantastic. So the purpose for this college is to identify, students who have the potential to be here and to flourish. And that includes people who can't afford to pay or have potentially unusual backgrounds, and also supporting people to do research. So everything to like about the purpose of the college. And the third thing I really like about the college is it's future looking. So it's considering issues of sustainability. How do we make the college more sustainable? And future is going to be really on my radar. In 50 years, who's going to come to this college? Who's going to want to come to this college? What's it going to be like to be here? So we need to look at our sustainability. Otherwise, people aren't going to want to be here. We're going to need to look at our estate. Is it the best that we can do? Do we have the right configuration, of buildings, etc.? And the other thing for future is money, actually. So I'm going to be incredibly active in relation to fundraising and looking for further donations so we can support the endowment, but also put money up for these, for students and for, resources and facilities that we want to build. So those are the three things, that a perfect combination, actually.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure a lot of people will be watching you.
I hope the donors are watching. Just to say, I'll be in touch quite soon.
So let's throw it open to questions. There are some roving mics, so please put your hand up if you want to ask something.
Thank you very much. A fascinating talk. You've touched on so many things, like the need for mentorship and those sort of sliding doors moments of sort of inflection points in people's life where you can go one way or another. And I often talk to people who are applying to the university, and it's interesting how many people have stories of coming for their interview and what a pivotal time it is in their life. You talked about Keith Channon, who also went on to become a very distinguished scientist. Yes. In his own place. We often see people like yourself as a catalogue of successes, but what about the failures? It sounds like all the failures in your life actually turned into successes by leading you on to other things. But have there been any times where you've really struggled, and sort of how have you dealt with that, and how do you move on from those things?
Yeah. It's interesting because we don't do CVs of failures, but actually mine would be quite long. So if we actually had a balanced sort of book of successes and failures, all of our CVs would be full of both. So I did have, my life has been a catalogue of both success and failure. I mean, getting an E in your physics, I knew then I couldn't go to medical school, right? And that was devastating to me, and I knew I had to reset. And when I went to Oxford, I didn't get the job I wanted, something else happened. There have been a series of disappointments and very difficult moments in my life. The pandemic was one of them, very difficult to work, actually, in the pandemic during that time. And you'll all have your own story to tell. But actually, I was... there were reasons why it was very difficult for me sometimes. You were in the public eye. You were on the TV quite a lot. I didn't want to be, but unless you controlled the narrative, and when I say control, that's not quite the right word, but the Science Media Centre, who's absolutely brilliant, Fiona Fox led that. She'll get 75 journalists in, and it means that you get one hit, everyone else gets to hear the same thing, so you're not being asked to do another interview, but you get accurate information out. So the accurate information. But being in the public eye was very difficult, actually. So I'm not sure I'd equate that with a failure, but that period in my life was the most shocking and difficult time. And some of you may know that I was, linked up with Matt Hancock's WhatsApp group, which some people say is a badge of honour. But that was actually a very difficult moment in my life. So there wasn't so much a failure, but actually just the point when you just go, whoa, that's really... So, but none of us actually talk about that very much. We need to show that, nobody is invincible, quite frankly.
There's one up there. Sally.
I just want to say, first of all, how moving it is to see a female master hand on to another female master. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because when I was here, it wasn't on the cards, I don't think. But my question really is picking up on what you were saying about being 16, not seeing yourself here. So it's a very obvious question, really, but what advice would you now give to your 16-year-old self?
Yeah, I mean, I could say something quite glib, like believe in yourself, but I don't think I would have paid any attention. So I think the question to myself is, would I have listened to any advice at all at 16? I'd turn it around, because I was a pretty headstrong 16-year-old, and we like to have these sort of ideas that we can go back and tell ourselves what we should have thought. I guess just knowing that I was capable, but I learned that myself. Going to the dentist, I realised I was capable of doing things. I actually had value as a person, as a human being. So perhaps I would say that, but whether I would listen to myself is quite another matter. I was pretty headstrong at 16, actually.
One on this side.
You described moving around a great deal, which seemed to come from your husband suggesting that you should go from Brighton and make things. Has he had any second thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, you'll be able to ask him yourself quite soon, because he'll be here, but not at all. He considers that... so my husband was a fireman, actually, and he worked in Brighton, and in fact he was around during the time that the bomb went off in the Grand, when Maggie Thatcher was affected. And but he had his feet on the ground, and I think he wanted an interesting life and thought this would be an interesting life. He never complained that we moved around quite a lot. I think he just said, bring it on, actually. He brought up the children largely whilst I worked. And so... Put it this way, he's never complained. But perhaps I should go home tonight and just say, what did you really think about all of those?
I'll see if he types anything in.
But I believe that together we've had a ball, to tell you the truth, and he has been my biggest supporter. So, but there might be a conversation tonight.
Right, there's a question online from an anonymous attendee who says, thank you very much for an inspiring conversation this evening. You're both so right when you said that inspiration comes from parents and teachers. What is your advice to other leaders and how they can help inspire the next generation?
That's a really big question. What I would say is, actually, we're all leaders and we're all followers. And so to think that there's these people who are, because I think the question was around what advice would you give to leaders? I think all of us can be leaders in the same way that all of us are followers. And I think that's a very good analogy, actually, for being a master. You're both a leader and a follower. So for young people, chance conversations can really turn the dial for them. And so to think that there's only one cohort of people that can influence, everybody around them can do that. So the key message for children is, you know, you are our future. You have the potential. You just have to work out what direction you're heading in, and we will kind of support you. But I think that's the job of all of us rather than a few.
And another question online. How did you achieve work-life balance, given that you had 3 children when you went to work in Thailand?
Yes. I don't know whether my views about work-life balance. I mean, I don't think my work-life balance has ever been consistent. I think that I have this kind of interaction between work and life, but they're kind of joined in the middle, and so and it's changed through time. So when I was a mum of young children, my work-life balance was different to what it is now because they're older and they've left home. So I'd prefer to see sort of work-life interaction rather than a work-life balance. And what I would say is never stayed the same. So I do like work because I'm curious about things, and so I do work quite long hours. But if I was asked to write down just kind of an average week, I find it completely impossible because there isn't such thing. And that's an average month, an average year, an average decade. So the work-life balance, because life has been so varied, it's completely gone up and down. Sometimes I've worked more than others. I've always liked to work because I think I've had the privilege of being born. I want to do what I can whilst I'm here. And that takes work, that takes, effort. So that is an important priority for me. But in terms of juggling everything, I went with the flow, to tell you the truth. And I don't have fixed ideas about that. And I would say the same to other people. You have to work it out for yourself. What suits your values, your life, your aspirations. If you have a partner, your partner, how does that all work for you? There isn't a single path, and there isn't a kind of glib answer to work-life balance. You've got to work it out yourself.
Absolutely. Question towards the front, Fran, just behind you.
Thank you so much. Fascinating. And I love having just unwinding paths that come from different places and ending, continuing to be where you are now. And I love that you drew the link between microbiome and sharing a meal and food and the fiber of society. And we're facing a generation of teenagers that potentially would live less years of disability than their parents. So I wondered, from the microbiological perspective and microbiome, if you would venture into that link of how the microbiome, certain foods, link into the social fiber that we're having, because the default right now is lunch al desco. So how do we rebuild that society and the links to the microbiome? It's probably both directional. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I've got 2 thoughts, actually. The first is that if you look at death rates in countries around the world, developed world, you'll see that the age of death, so your age for men and women of death, it's particularly stark in the US, but it's going down. So the idea that we're going to have less years of disability, actually, I'm not certain, because the health inequalities that are coming up fast in developed countries is really, really worrying. So, we're having people who have significant health issues, and that is going to impact on their ability to survive in healthy years. So I don't think there needs to be, we can't have an assumption that people are just going to keep on, having longer and longer lives, and that's associated with more and more health. You've only got to look around, even around our patch in Cambridgeshire and beyond, to see that there's massive health inequalities. So I think we have to acknowledge that and do something about it, actually. in terms of like the perfect interaction with your food, what we really need to do is get beyond the hype and really dig down on the evidence and dig down on more research. So, there's a lot of talk about the microbiome, but what do we, how flexible is it? If we change our diet completely, is it going to stay in a certain state? And therefore, what's the impact on our life? Is it going to reduce my risk of dementia? Is it going to reduce my risk of heart disease or Parkinson's disease? Is it going to mean I lose weight? There's a lot of speculation, actually. And what we really need to do is gather the body of evidence that a particular microbiome supports a particular health outcome or lack of a health outcome. And this is how you get that, and you keep it that way, because actually you don't want the microbiome to sort of ping back to what it used to be. So if you think that's a particularly healthy state. So that's a long way of saying we have to look at other issues in terms of our ill health. And I still don't think we know enough to be making widespread recommendations about what people should eat and what they don't. Not only that, actually getting people to eat particular foods comes back to the health inequalities and the challenges that we face for human health and wellness. So.
Hi, thanks very much for your fascinating talk, Professor Peacock. So, I'm from Thailand, so I know how different Thailand and the UK are.
You like food?
Oh, yeah, the food is one example. So my question is, so when you moved to Thailand, what's like the number one most important thing you did to adapt the culture there, both working and like your outside work, and also what did you have to do to adapt it back to the UK when you returned?
That's a really interesting question. Going there, I had to show great humility, actually, and listen to people. I couldn't take my Western views. It was very interesting. The first week, one of my team, she was junior to me. She said, "I don't like what you're wearing. You're going to have to go shopping with me." So we went shopping, and she bought these clothes off the rack, and I put them on, and I didn't think they suited me, but that's what was expected culturally of me, and that was just one example, and that you had to be humble enough to say, really, that's what I need to listen to. So the biggest thing I think in terms of going to Thailand was listening to what people expected of you, and how you fitted into society. So that was an interesting journey for me, because I had to reverse what I thought was my norms of behaviour. So watching people, listening to people, what is the norm of behaviour here? How do I fit in? And I don't think I've ever been the same since I come back, because I've taken on some of the norms of behaviour that I saw there. Coming back, there were so many things I missed. Actually, I was deeply enjoyed working in rural Asia. The beauty, the people there, the food there, and so I had to adapt to not being able to, get on a plane or get in my car and drive there. Different environment, and coming back to the sandwich culture, which I was particularly pleased about. But that's such an interesting question. I need to go away and just have a think about that. And you learn more about yourself thinking about those sorts of questions, I think.
Well, we probably need to wrap up now. There will be drinks outside in the buttery, and you'll have more chance to catch Sharon. But thank you very much for...
Well, thank you for inviting me and for being a fantastic questioner.
Right, well, as I said, you were my last victim and you survived.